In the beginning, there were no Arabs. There were no Israelites either, no Adamites, no Moabites, no named peoples walking the earth with banners and borders and bloodlines carved into stone. There was only the dust of the earth and the breath of God moving over it, shaping it into men. But God, in his wisdom, had ordained that from one man would come many nations, and from one promise would flow two rivers, one bearing covenant, the other bearing providence. Both would water the world, both would endure. This is the story of how that second river began, not in the palaces of kings or the temples of priests, but in the wilderness, in the desperate cry of a woman cast out, in the faith of a child who learned to draw a bow while angels watched, in the tents of a patriarch who loved two women and fathered nations through both. This is the story of Ishmael, and of the desert peoples who rose from his loins, the sons of the sands, the princes of the wastes, the forefathers of the Arabs. The call came to Abram when he was 75 years old. Leave your country, your kindred, your father's house. Go to a land I will show you. I will make of you a great nation. A great nation. The words rang in his ears like temple bells, impossibly loud, impossibly clear. A great nation required sons. Sons required a wife who could bear them. And Sarai, his wife, beautiful, loyal, barren Sarai, had given him none. Still he went. He left Ur of the Chaldeans, that ancient city of ziggurats and idol worship, and journeyed west with his wife, his nephew Lot, and all the possessions they had gathered. They traveled through Haran, down into Canaan past Shechem and Bethel, pitching tents under alien stars, strangers in a land that God said would one day belong to his descendants. But where were those descendants? Years passed. 5, 10, 15. Sarai's womb remained closed, silent as a sealed tomb, and Abram began to wonder if he had misheard, if the promise had been conditional, if faith required something more than obedience, some action, some human ingenuity to help the Almighty along. Sarai wondered too. She watched her husband's hair turn from black to gray. She watched the younger women in the camp swell with life, their bellies round and full, while her own remained flat and barren. She felt the weight of failure, the shame of being the wife who could not provide an heir. And so she made a decision born of love, perhaps, or desperation, or the customs of that ancient world where a barren wife could offer her maidservant as a surrogate, and the child born would legally belong to the mistress. "Look," she said to Abram one evening, her voice tight with something that might have been resignation or resolve. "The Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go in to my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her." The servant's name was Hagar. She was Egyptian, young, silent. Perhaps she had been acquired during their sojourn in Egypt years before, a gift from Pharaoh's court, or purchased in a marketplace along the Nile. The scriptures do not say. They only tell us that she was there, a shadow in Sarai's tent, a woman with no voice in her own fate. And Abram listened to his wife. He went in to Hagar, and she conceived. Everything changed after that. Hagar, who had been nothing, a foreigner, a servant, a piece of property, suddenly became the mother of Abram's child, the one who had succeeded where the mistress had failed. And with that success came something dangerous: pride. She began to look at Sarai differently, not with the downcast eyes of a servant, but with a kind of subtle contempt, a knowing glance, a slight hesitation before obeying a command. The unspoken message was clear. "I have given him what you could not." Sarai felt it like a blade between the ribs, and her love curdled into bitterness. "May the wrong done to me be on you," she cried to Abram. "I gave my servant to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me." Abram, caught between two women and the consequences of his own choices, did what men often do when domestic storms rage. He retreated. "Behold, your servant is in your power," he said. "Do to her as you please." And Sarai dealt harshly with her. The scriptures do not detail what form that harshness took, whether it was words or blows, extra labor or public humiliation. But it was enough. Hagar fled. Pregnant, alone, and terrified, she ran into the wilderness. The desert is not a place for the fragile. It does not forgive hesitation or reward sentiment. It strips away pretense and exposes the soul. Under the relentless sun, with no water and no shelter, a person learns quickly what they are made of. Hagar walked until her legs trembled, until her throat burned and her vision blurred. She found a spring, a rare mercy in that barren land, and she sat down beside it, her hand resting on the swell of her belly. She did not know where she was going. She had no plan, no future, only the instinct to survive and the child growing inside her, a constant reminder of the mess her life had become. And then, in that place of utter desolation, the angel of the Lord found her. "Hagar, servant of Sarai," the voice said, and she looked up, startled. "Where have you come from, and where are you going?" "I am fleeing from my mistress Sarai," she whispered. The angel's response was not what she expected. "Return to your mistress and submit to her." Return? To the harshness? To the contempt? To the life of servitude and silent suffering? But the angel was not finished. "I will surely multiply your offspring so that they cannot be numbered for multitude." The words hung in the hot desert air like a banner unfurled. "I will multiply your offspring," not Sarai's offspring through her, not Abram's heir by proxy, her offspring, her descendants. The angel continued, and every word was a prophecy carved into eternity. "Behold, you are pregnant and shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has listened to your affliction. He shall be a wild donkey of a man, his hand against everyone and everyone's hand against him, and he shall dwell over against all his kinsmen." Ishmael. God hears. Hagar, the Egyptian servant, the cast-off woman with no status and no voice, had been heard by God. She wept. And then she named the place. "You are a God of seeing," she said, her voice trembling with awe. "Truly here I have seen him who looks after me." The well became known as Bir Lahai Roy, the well of the living one who sees me. And Hagar returned. Ishmael was born when Abram was 86 years old. The camp erupted in celebration. Goats were slaughtered. Wine was poured. The men clasped Abram on the shoulder and congratulated him, their voices loud and joyful under the evening sky. Finally, an heir. Finally, a son to carry his name and inherit his wealth. Abram held the child in his arms and looked down at the small, wrinkled face. This was the fulfillment of the promise, he thought. This boy, born of Hagar, would be the father of nations. For 13 years that belief held. Ishmael grew strong and quick. He learned to tend the flocks, to ride, to shoot. He was his father's pride, his constant companion. Abram taught him the stories of the God who had called him out of Ur, the God who had promised descendants as numerous as the stars. And Ishmael believed. But when Abram was 99 years old, God appeared to him again, and everything changed. The Lord made a covenant, an eternal covenant, with Abram, now renamed Abraham. He promised him a son by Sarai, now renamed Sarah, a son of the covenant, a son through whom all the nations of the earth would be blessed. His name would be Isaac. Abraham fell on his face and laughed, not from joy, but from disbelief tinged with desperation. "Oh, that Ishmael might live before you," he cried. It was the prayer of a father who loved his son, who had invested 13 years of hope and love into the boy, who could not bear the thought of him being cast aside. God's response was gentle but firm. "As for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I have blessed him and will make him fruitful and multiply him greatly. He shall father 12 princes, and I will make him into a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac." 2 sons, 2 promises, 1 covenant, 1 blessing. When Isaac was born, the camp was split. There was joy, yes. An old woman giving birth was a miracle, undeniable proof of God's power. But there was also tension. Ishmael, now a teenager, watched as his infant half-brother received the attention, the gifts, the whispered prophecies. He tried not to care, tried to hold on to the promise God had given his mother, "I will multiply your offspring." But it stung. And then came the feast. It was Isaac's weaning celebration, a significant milestone in that culture. Abraham hosted a grand gathering, and the entire household joined in the festivities. Somewhere in the midst of it all, Sarah saw Ishmael, mocking, she said, laughing at Isaac, perhaps, or simply playing, as teenage boys do. But Sarah saw a threat. "Cast out this slave woman and her son," she demanded, her voice cold and unyielding. "For the son of this slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac." The words were like stones hurled at Abraham's chest. He loved Ishmael. He could not imagine sending him away into the wilderness, into uncertainty, into possible death. But God spoke again. "Be not displeased because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you, for through Isaac shall your offspring be named. And I will make a nation of the son of the slave woman also, because he is your offspring." It was a command and a promise. Abraham rose early the next morning. He took bread and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar, placing them on her shoulder along with the sea. Hagar wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. The water ran out quickly. The sun was merciless. Ishmael, weakened by thirst, began to stumble. She could not bear to watch him die. She placed him under a bush, one of the few patches of shade in that desolate place, and walked away, about a bowshot's distance. Then she sat down and wept. "Let me not look on the death of the child," she cried. Her voice was raw, broken. She had survived exile once before. She had obeyed the angel and returned, trusting in the promise. And now here she was again, alone, abandoned, watching her son die in the sand. But God heard the voice of the boy, Ishmael. God hears. The angel of God called to Hagar from heaven. "What troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Up, lift up the boy, and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make him into a great nation." And God opened her eyes. There, just beyond where she sat, was a well of water. She ran to it, filled the skin, and gave the boy drink, and he lived. God was with Ishmael as he grew up. He dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, that vast and trackless waste east of Canaan, south toward Egypt. He became an expert with the bow, a hunter, a survivor. His mother took a wife for him from Egypt, from her own people, and he became the father of 12 sons. The names of Ishmael's sons are recorded in the book of Genesis, inscribed there by the same hand that recorded the lineages of kings. Nebaioth, the firstborn, Kedar, Adbeel, Mibsam, Mishma, Dumah, Massa, Hadad, Tema, Jetur, Naphish, Kedema, 12 princes, 12 tribes. Each name carried weight, destiny, a territory yet to be claimed. Nebaioth's descendants would become known for their flocks, their tents stretching across the northern deserts. Kedar's people would be famed as warriors and traders, their black tents a symbol recognized from Babylon to Egypt. Tema would give rise to an oasis city, a refuge for caravans crossing the burning sands. These were not savages or barbarians. They were organized, resilient, adaptive. They learned to read the stars for navigation, to find water where others saw only death, to breed camels, those great ships of the desert, and to move goods across distances that would break settled peoples. They were the sons of Ishmael, and they were, as the angel had foretold, a people set apart. Living in tension with surrounding nations, fiercely independent, their hand against others and others' hands against them. Not out of malice, but out of necessity. The desert teaches a man to defend what is his, for there is little to spare. They dwelt from Havilah to Shur, which is opposite Egypt in the direction of Assyria. A vast territory, stretching from the borders of Mesopotamia to the frontiers of Africa. And they multiplied. But Ishmael was not Abraham's only son by a second mother. After Sarah died, Abraham took another wife. Her name was Keturah. Some traditions suggest she may have been a concubine, but the text calls her a wife. And through her, Abraham fathered 6 more sons: Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shuah. To these sons, Abraham gave gifts while he still lived: livestock, wealth, knowledge, and then he sent them away eastward, to the east country, away from Isaac, his heir. Why? To prevent conflict, to establish them in their own right, with their own inheritance, without competition for the covenant land. Midian, one of Keturah's sons, became the father of the Midianites, a people who would intersect with Israel's history again and again. It was Midianite traders who bought Joseph from his brothers and carried him down to Egypt. It was in Midian that Moses fled after killing the Egyptian, and it was a Midianite priest, Jethro, who became his father-in-law and gave him wise counsel. The other sons settled in the Arabian Peninsula, their descendants becoming traders, metalworkers, and warriors. They too learned the language of the desert, the rhythms of survival, the songs sung beneath endless stars. Abraham, the father of many nations, died at a good old age, full of years. And when he was buried in the cave of Machpelah, it was Isaac and Ishmael together who laid him to rest. 2 brothers, 2 lines, united for a moment in grief and honor. The covenant line ran through Isaac. That was always clear. God had spoken it plainly. Through Isaac shall your offspring be named. Isaac, who married Rebekah. Isaac, who fathered Jacob and Esau. Jacob, who became Israel. And from Israel came the 12 tribes, the priesthood, the kings, the prophets, the law, the temple, and eventually the Messiah. That was the covenant. But providence ran through Ishmael. God had not abandoned him, had not forgotten him. He blessed him, multiplied him, made him into a great nation just as he had promised. Ishmael lived 137 years, a long life, a full life. And when he died, his sons carried on his legacy. The Ishmaelites became synonymous with the desert peoples, traders moving along caravan routes, connecting Egypt to Mesopotamia, carrying spices, incense, gold, and silk. When the scriptures speak of Ishmaelites, they often speak of commerce, of movement, of the great highways of the ancient world that passed through Arabia. Kedar's descendants, in particular, rose to prominence. The tents of Kedar became proverbial for their darkness and beauty, mentioned in the songs of Solomon. The flocks of Kedar were prized, their warriors were feared. In the prophetic books, Arabia is mentioned with respect. Isaiah speaks of the oracles concerning Arabia, of the caravans of Dedanites, the burden upon Tema, the doom pronounced on Kedar. These were real peoples, powerful enough to warrant the attention of prophets, and they all traced their lineage back to Abraham. It is a profound thing when you stop to consider it, that the God of the Bible did not reserve his attention solely for the line of the covenant, that he did not cast aside those who were outside the promise of Isaac, that he heard the cry of a foreign woman in the wilderness and made her son into princes. This is not syncretism. It is not universalism. It is the sovereignty of God. The covenant promises, the land, the seed, the blessing, were given to Isaac and his line. But the general providence of God, his care for all peoples, his intention to bless the families of the earth through Abraham, extended far wider. Ishmael was blessed because he was Abraham's son, and his descendants inherited not Canaan, but something equally suited to them, the vast, unconquerable wilderness, a land that could not be farmed like Canaan, could not be held by fortresses and walls, but required a different kind of strength, a strength that endured. Centuries passed. The descendants of Isaac became the nation of Israel, dwelling in the land God had promised. The descendants of Ishmael and Keturah's sons became the peoples of the Arabian Peninsula and the surrounding regions, dwelling in tents and trading towns, oasis cities and desert strongholds. They spoke related languages, Semitic tongues, cousins to Hebrew. They told stories around fires, passed down genealogies, honored their ancestors. They knew, many of them, that they came from Abraham. In the days of King David, some of these peoples paid tribute to Israel. In the days of Solomon, the Queen of Sheba, possibly from southern Arabia, came to Jerusalem with gifts of gold and spices, marveling at Solomon's wisdom. In later centuries, when Israel was exiled and scattered, some found refuge among the Arabian tribes. Traders from Kedar and Tema brought goods to Jerusalem. The connections, though often strained, were never entirely severed, and the prophecies concerning them continued. Isaiah spoke of a day when the glory of Kedar would fail, when Arabia would be brought low. But he also spoke of a day when nations would stream to Jerusalem, when the wealth of the Gentiles would come to Zion, when even the flocks of Kedar and the rams of Nebaioth would be brought as offerings. A day of ingathering, a day when the children of Abraham, all of them, would be brought into the purposes of God. What does it mean? For the modern reader, for the believer seeking to understand the biblical narrative of origins, what does this story teach? First, that God is faithful. He promised Hagar that her son would become a great nation, and he kept that promise. He does not lie. He does not forget. Even those who seem to be on the margins of his plan are seen, heard, and blessed. Second, that covenant and providence are not the same, but both are real. Isaac's line carried the covenant, the specific particular promises of redemption. But Ishmael's line carried providence, the general blessings of God upon humanity, the multiplication of peoples, the filling of the earth. Both mattered. Both were part of God's unfolding design. Third, that shared ancestry does not erase distinction, but neither does distinction erase kinship. Isaac and Ishmael were brothers. Their descendants shared a father, shared blood, shared early history. But they walked different paths, inherited different promises, became different peoples. And yet, when Abraham died, they came together. Perhaps that is an image worth holding on to. In the deserts of Arabia today, there are still Bedouin tribes who trace their lineage back through the centuries, back through dynasties and empires, back through oral histories kept alive around fires in goat hair tents. They do not all know the scriptures. Many do not. But the land remembers. The wells still bear ancient names. The trade routes still follow the paths of the old caravans. The languages still echo with the cadence of Abraham's tongue. And somewhere, written in the genealogies of Genesis, preserved across 3 millennia, are the names of 12 princes who became tribes, who became peoples, who became nations. Ishmael's legacy, not the covenant line, but a line nonetheless, blessed by God, multiplied by God, sustained by God, and in the grand tapestry of redemption history, part of the story. When the Apostle Paul wrote to the churches centuries later, he spoke of Abraham as the father of all who believe, Jew and Gentile alike. He spoke of the promise being fulfilled not through the flesh, but through faith. But he also acknowledged the distinction. Israel, according to the flesh, still mattered. The covenant promises were still theirs. And yet, the gospel was for all nations. Perhaps the story of Ishmael and Isaac is, in some way, a preview of that mystery. 2 sons, 2 paths, both under the hand of God, one carrying the specific line of Messiah, the other carrying the broader purposes of providence. And at the end of all things, when the kingdoms of this world become the kingdom of our Lord, perhaps they will stand together once more, not as rivals, but as brothers, children of Abraham, heirs of promise, witnesses to the faithfulness of the God who heard a boy crying in the desert and turned his exile into a nation. There is a well in the wilderness, still known by its ancient name, Bir Lahai Roi, the well of the living one who sees me. Hagar sat there once, broken and alone, and discovered that God saw her, that he heard her son's cry, that his purposes extended beyond the boundaries she could see. And perhaps, in our own wilderness moments, when we feel cast out, forgotten, on the margins of the main story, we too can find hope in that well. Because the God who saw Hagar sees us. The God who heard Ishmael hears us. And the story he is writing is far larger, far more intricate than we can imagine. So let the desert winds blow. Let the caravans cross the burning sands. Let the tents of Keturah stretch from horizon to horizon. Let the sons of the desert thrive and multiply. For they too are part of the story. The origin of the Arabs, according to the Bible, is not a footnote. It is not an accident. It is the fulfillment of a promise made to a desperate woman beside a desert spring. I will surely multiply your offspring so that they cannot be numbered for multitude. And God kept his word, as he always does, as he always will. Blessed be the Lord God of Abraham, who sees the outcast and hears the afflicted, who makes nations from the dust and kings from the forgotten, who keeps covenant with one line and providence with all, who holds the whole world in his hands and never lets go. From generation to generation, his faithfulness endures, and the story is not yet finished. Amen.